It's about that time. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. I have to say, I'm personally very excited to introduce Onkuri Majumdar. Did I pronounce that right?
Almost. It's Onkuri Majumdar.
Oh, thank you. My sincere apologies.
No problem.
But Onkuri is going to be talking to us tonight about wildlife crime. And this is, I know for me, an issue and a topic that is top of my list to learn more about. So I'm very excited to welcome you to our program, and I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen. I have a PowerPoint for you guys. And we can begin. Can you see it? Okay, there we go. So hi, everyone, again. My name is Onkuri Majumdar, and I'm from India. I work for a frontline anti-trafficking organization called Freeland. We are headquartered here in Asia, but we have offices in 4 continents across the world. And our vision and mission is a world free of wildlife trafficking and human slavery. Now, when someone from a wildlife trafficking background like me starts talking about their work, it is usual to start with a slide of statistics. So if I had such a slide, it would be full of statistics saying things like wildlife crime is worth about 20 billion US dollars or more annually. Or I could be putting up very sad statistics about the number of rangers who lose their lives to poachers and traffickers while protecting our habitats. I could put up really sad statistics about the number of animals that are killed or die during transport. And after seeing all those statistics, I am sure everyone would say, yes, this is a very serious problem. Someone should do something about it. What can I do about it? It sounds like something that a very high-powered committee or a special task force should be looking at. Well, allow me to change your mind. Let's go through a couple of pictures I'd like to show you.
So how will you take it on the flight?
On the flight.
Yeah.
Normally, my customer come from another country.
Uh-huh.
Hidden in the bag.
Oh,
in the luggage.
In the carry-on baggage or check-in baggage?
Because baby size, that's easy.
Okay.
So I put in the shoe.
Oh, in the shoe.
Put in the box.
Okay.
Put in the suitcase.
Oh, okay.
Yes, not that.
So it doesn't show in the X-ray of the customs.
Baby size because cannot move it. X-ray no.
Now, in case that wasn't clear, that was me with an undercover camera talking to a trafficker who was giving me very specific advice on how to smuggle one of the most endangered tortoises in the world on a flight, hidden either in my shoe or in my check-in baggage. The tortoises we were talking about, they are Madagascar plowshare tortoises, and they are so endangered that there are only about 200 or 300 individuals of them left in the wild. All of them found on the tip of the island of Madagascar, or sometimes in wildlife markets like this. Let's look at another picture. These are pangolin scales. This was a seizure at an airport. Now, pangolins are small animals. You can hold one of them in your hand. So you can imagine how many thousands of them had to be killed for this one seizure. And this is just one seizure. We see so many seizures like this all the time. Here's another airport, another picture of a live pangolin consignment this time. These animals were hidden in these crates, and they were going to be shipped as airline cargo, and they were going to be hidden under consignment of frozen fish and seafood. Another picture from an airport. You can just count and calculate how many elephants had to be killed just for this one seizure. And again, we see seizures like this all the time. Now, these tusks that you see in the picture, they're relatively clean. But very often the elephants have been so freshly killed, you can even see blood stains on the elephant tusks in the consignment. And quite often that is how these seizures are detected, because airport officers can actually smell the decomposing blood and flesh on the tusks. Another airport check, passenger's suitcase was opened and it turned out to be full of baby slow lorises. Now these are primates, and you can imagine what kind of zoonotic diseases they could be capable of transferring to humans. Another seizure at yet another airport. These are bags and bags of lion skeletons, each skeleton individually wrapped in its own plastic bag, very neatly. Let's go to a land crossing. This is a border checkpost, just a regular truck full of ice and a few dead tigers and leopards on the ice. Here's me pretending to be another foolish tourist at a very popular tourist entertainment area, holding a slow loris. Now, in these tourist areas, it's quite common for people to bring slow lorises and other animals out for tourists to take pictures with. Let's go to a river crossing. On the boat, along with passengers, there are sackfuls and sackfuls of tortoises and turtles. Here's another market. It could be a pet market, it could be a food market, but you can see there's a primate and you can imagine what kind of diseases it might be carrying. Now, this disease threat is very, very real. And most of the animals, the live animals that make it to these markets, whether they're for pets or for consumption, they've usually been transported under very inhumane conditions. They might have open wounds from stress, from biting, from fighting each other, or from their capture. They're obviously not given any medical treatment or even adequate water and hydration during their trip. So they are prime vectors of disease. And the other important thing to remember is when animals are transported or brought together at this market, that's essentially bringing together species that in the wild, in their natural state, would never have come into contact with other species. So we're just creating easier and easier mechanisms for disease transfer. And here's the point I'm trying to make. All these pictures that I just showed you, these aren't super secret transport mechanisms used only by traffickers. These are your regular airlines, your regular boats, your regular markets, your regular land crossings that people may even be walking across, not just using vehicles, your regular entertainment and tourist areas. So each time you and I go to a place like this, we are basically putting ourselves in the vicinity of a ticking time bomb. Every time you fly on a plane and there's wildlife being smuggled in the cargo or in the cabin, you're next to a ticking time bomb. Every time you're in a boat, a train, a vehicle that someone's using to smuggle wildlife, you're next to a ticking time bomb. If you go to an entertainment venue or people are walking around with wild animals for people to take pictures with, you're next to a ticking time bomb. And that bomb is the threat of a future zoonotic pandemic. And I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say we cannot afford another 2020. We just cannot. So what do we do about it? Well, in the beginning, I said this is something that concerns all of us. But when we started out, we first started focusing on the frontline officers, rangers who are out there actually patrolling our forests and keeping our habitat safe. And if you're sick of Zoom calls during your meeting, I mean, try and imagine what it would be like doing a job where a standard risk is being trampled to death by elephants and facing diseases like malaria, getting parasites, and not even getting a very high pay on top of all that. So I really salute the rangers who are out there actually protecting natural habitats for all of us. Then we also started to focus on trainings for high-level police investigators because we realized that protecting animals while they're still alive in their habitats is important, but it's not enough because animals still do get poached. And that's when investigation agencies like police agencies come in. And very often we see that they're just happy to end their case after a big seizure or arrest. But the key here is that people are replaceable. What that basically means is if you're a low-level transporter, there'll be 20 other people willing to take your job for the money. But even after we started encouraging people, police officers, to go after high-level syndicate members, for example, this picture here is of Vichai Keo Sawang, who's the head of a wildlife syndicate based out of Lao PDR. He's sourcing wildlife, his syndicate is sourcing wildlife from several countries in Africa and Asia. And this is one of the infamous rhino hunts in South Africa that was supplying horns to his syndicate. So with people like this, even if you start taking out middle level and high level syndicate managers, people are replaceable. Sooner or later, the syndicate will find someone and carry on. So we thought, okay, how can we actually strike a crippling blow to these syndicates? So that's when we started focusing on follow the money type investigations. And what happens there is we train officers to go after the syndicate's assets, which means any land, any gold, any jewelry, any vehicles, any apartments, even stacks of cash that the syndicate may have amassed. And that is when you take this money away, that is when you actually drain the blood, the lifeblood of these syndicates. And that's what really makes them stop and not continue. Because let's face it, right now, wildlife crime still remains a very, very low risk and high reward enterprise. It's so easy to pay people off. Usually fines and penalties are pretty low in most countries across the world. So what is the incentive for anyone to stop trafficking once they start making so much money so easily? Take away their money. So that's what we've been working on. And the good thing about that is we can bring in non-traditional enforcement agencies. So not just wildlife officials, not just only customs officials, but even officials from, say, anti-money laundering units, from anti-corruption units, from revenue intelligence units, tax inspectors, because of course criminals are not declaring their taxes on all the profits they're making. And by bringing in this sort of multi-agency group, we are seeing greater successes, and we're really hoping that this asset seizure aspect is taken up by enforcement agencies all over the world. But here I come back to my original question, how does it affect you? Okay, right now we've been talking about law enforcement and important task forces, and then we realized, hang on, law enforcement isn't the only group of people whose work intersects with wildlife. The transportation industry certainly does. So we started to do trainings for airlines and eventually hope to expand those trainings to other transportation sectors as well. And then we realized that there are so many other industries where even if they're not coming into contact with wildlife, even if they're not cargo handlers at an airport or law enforcement agencies, even if they're just bank officers sitting at their desks, there is something they can do about wildlife crime. Because a lot of criminals, a lot of these big syndicates actually use international wire transfers to transfer money to their local hunters or traffickers on the ground. And that obviously becomes a financial crime because you are set up international transfer mechanisms for profits, for illegal profits. So that's just a way of bringing more and more people in. So one of the things we first did was developing tech tools like this app called wildscan. And I really encourage you to go ahead and download this on your phone. It's free to download on both platforms, iOS as well as Android. And we, again, originally developed it for wildlife law enforcement because we found a lot of people whose jobs were to make decisions, instant decisions. Like, let's say you're a customs officer or you're an airport cargo consignment officer, and you see something that contains animals, you're not quite sure. Typically, people just let it go, not necessarily because of corruption, but they know because if they open a case, it's going to take a really long time to get an expert to make an identification. And then if it turns out to be a false alarm, their supervisor is just going to come down on them like a ton of bricks saying that they're slowing things down. So we have this app which can be easily downloaded on anyone's smartphone, and you start by answering 3 or 4 really simple, non-technical questions about what you're seeing in front of you. Like, is it covered with feathers or fur? Is it larger than your hand or is it larger than a dog? Things like that. And that narrows the search down and it gives you what potentially you could be seeing in front of you. And then you click on that and it gives you a host of information that helps you make that decision. What are its international protection statutes? What countries does it come from? Photographs of how it is typically smuggled or how its body part is typically smuggled. And very, very importantly, if it is live, how to handle it until a vet arrives. Now, that is from the point of view of the animal, how to not stress it out, but also equally importantly for the human being who is actually interdicting, like how to protect yourself from zoonotic diseases if you're a customs officer inspecting wildlife. Now, once we created this app, we realized, hey, it's not just enforcement people and border officials who can use it. It can be used by anyone. You could be a school teacher taking your class out for a school trip to the market where wild animals are being sold. You could be a tourist. You could be someone in the tourism authority of a country who encourages tourists to download this app and report anything they see. You could be a postal worker, a courier worker. Anyone can use this app. So we really encourage you to use this and similar apps to become part of the citizen science reporting process, so we get a better, bigger picture of how much wildlife crime is happening and where. We also developed these toolkits. These are, again, freely available on our website. We developed this first for the aviation industry because they're very flight oriented. So any airline can download this and change things around to put their own logo and branding. But again, we've put the free templates up. So if you're a school teacher, if you just want to make one of these a poster to put on your bedroom wall, anything like that, you can download it, change it around, put your name, your picture on it. We encourage you to do that and spread the word. The other thing we're working on is this data fusion center, because we realized in many countries, local nonprofits have a lot of information which law enforcement agencies might not. And that's because sometimes, because of corruption concerns, people prefer to give intelligence to nonprofits rather than law enforcement. So we started bringing together information that we had as well as from other nonprofits into this data fusion center that we're calling ASSET. It stands for Analytical Center of Excellence in Trafficking. But what we really want is that it should encourage people to go after the assets of these syndicates. So we put out reports that can, again, be used by anyone, school teachers, policymakers, media, and they're in multiple languages as well. So go ahead and download those if you need these tools. We've got a site called wildlifeprotectiontools.net. It has a bunch of tools that we've created: videos, flyers, infographics. Go ahead and download those. Use them to educate yourself, educate others. And another thing that we're really, really proud of is this group called End Pandemics. Now, End Pandemics is a bunch of very, very passionate organizations and individuals. And we've come together to create, hopefully, a world where there are no more pandemics. Because right now, we are looking at everyone scrambling to get a vaccine for COVID-19. And that's good. That's important. That's what is needed urgently right now. But what happens when the next pandemic comes, and the next, and the next? And they will. And that's not something that just wildlife conservationists are saying. That's what even epidemiologists are saying. Because what we're doing is we're shrinking wildlife habitats. We're coming into contact with these animals. We are transporting them in conditions which make it really possible for animals to transmit diseases from each other and to humans. If they're being transported for consumption, then the slaughtering is done in pretty unhygienic conditions. That's another vector for disease. And so just simply creating a vaccine for COVID, it's a first step. But what we need is to make sure pandemics never happen again. So check out the site. We've got a host of solutions up there. These include tools that you could use right now, tools that we want to develop further, tools on we want to look at ways of changing agriculture so we're not invading wildlife habitats so much. We want to create tools for equipping and informing people. There's a bunch of things out there, so go ahead and check that out. And finally, this is our website. Feel free to check that out. And if there's anything you take away from this talk, please just keep in mind, wildlife crime affects all of us. It's not something that governments can solve alone. Every time you travel, whenever that happens again, every time you go to an entertainment venue, if you buy souvenirs based on wildlife products, you are coming in contact with the wildlife trade. And very often that trade is illegal. Just because something's available in a shop doesn't necessarily mean that it's legal. So do your best to stop it, do your best to educate yourself, use these tools to report, to come up with ideas, to join with like-minded people, because we really need to create a different planet, or just be prepared for more and more pandemics. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. What a very important and very timely topic. I have to say, would you agree that this is such a wildlife crime? Given all the other conservation that's being done, on the ground, if this doesn't ever get under control, that's never it's gonna just be always playing catch up, because it's just wildlife crime is on such an industrial scale at this point.
Yeah, the way I look at it, in situ conservation is equally important. They're just like two, what should I say, two arms of the same figure. So you obviously need to protect animals in their habitat, because that is the best way to protect them. But the reality is very often the protection fails, and not necessarily because of someone not doing the job well, but because criminals target animals. And I think the best description of that I heard was from a very successful wildlife prosecutor, who said that all these laws and trainings that we do to protect rangers and so on, they're like creating a mosquito net around your bed. So yes, that will prevent mosquitoes from biting you. But the job of that mosquito is not to dismantle the net. The job of the mosquito is to find that one hole that allows it to get in. And that's what criminals are often doing. They're just, they're looking at what is the patrol schedule, when is it a full moon night, when is a dark night, when is there a lot of change in management in protected areas, which means no one is consistently monitoring patrol reports. We've even had cases of traffickers trying to hack the emails of officers when they're sending in camera trap pictures, because camera trap pictures usually have some geolocation metadata in them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty serious. And I think we just need this holistic effort where you are having all these in situ conservation measures, but accept the fact that some criminals will manage to find that hole in your mosquito net, and then how do you nab them?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great analogy. And I'm curious how, with the wildlife crime that's been happening, in the last, now going on almost, 18 months, 2 years, have you seen it slow down? Have you seen it pick up? Like, how have you kind of seen it change with all the lockdowns that this situation caused in the first place?
Yeah, so unfortunately, it has not been good for wildlife, because lockdowns or people who are not able to report to work because of COVID restrictions just basically means there are fewer eyes and ears out there. So it actually means in some parts of the world, poaching has gone up. So it's quite a scary situation. And also, there are some criminals who deal specifically with non-perishable wildlife items. So those would be things like rhino horns, elephant ivory, pangolin scales, things that don't decompose, basically. And we've been seeing this very worrying trend for several years now, that many of these traffickers are not releasing their products into the black market. They're actually holding onto them, stockpiling them like securities, because they are banking on the extinction of the animal to drive the prices of their stockpile up. So for them, you can't even argue with them, oh, you lose your business if the animal becomes extinct. They want the animal to become extinct, because then whatever they release into the market will be the last of a dwindling stock, and they can command higher prices.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just, when you were talking about like the innovative ways to follow the money, and to, try and basically, I guess, starve them out of business, do you find that, from like a policy and perspective, if you really work on the international scale, or if you, or do it by country or region by region, that it's more effective? And have you seen where maybe laws that are on the books for drug trafficking or human trafficking or arms trafficking to try and encourage the use of those laws and bring the wildlife trafficking under those umbrellas.
Absolutely, that's what we have been doing. So we always try to encourage the agencies we're working with. Don't just try and book them under wildlife laws or customs violation laws. Usually those are pretty low in many countries. So we're telling them, were they also carrying a firearm? Then use arms acts. Were they also smuggling narcotics? That happens quite often. So then try and booking them under narcotics legislation. Were they using underage couriers? There can be crimes against minors. Were they selling them online? Use your cybercrime laws. So just have this multi-pronged prosecution, because one way or the other, you will get a better conviction rate in that way. And then in terms of bringing multi-agencies together, yes, we have been actually, before COVID, of course, convening these face-to-face meetings with enforcement agencies from all along the illicit supply chain. So, for example, if we're looking at a syndicate that's trafficking, let's say, rhino horn from Africa to consumer markets in Asia, then we would create a sort of war room, as it were, where investigators would bring their live cases and work together from the source African countries and the destination Asian countries. And that way we saw pretty amazing results. Now, we can't have this face-to-face stuff because of COVID, but we are planning to do, continuing to bring people together online, because really the sort of synergy that develops, I know I'm using a very buzzwordy word, but it's true, the sort of synergy that develops when you see the face behind the email, that actually leads to much better enforcement rates than just sending a random email into the void and expecting an answer.
No, absolutely. And, it's going to take collaboration and cooperation to really solve this issue and make a dent. I'm curious, when you're looking at the seizures of wildlife and they're coming through on airlines and stuff, do you guys tend to see it more as like personal carry-on, or more common to see larger shipments being sent, via air cargo?
Yeah, so that depends on the consignment and the ultimate purpose. So with things, again, which are non-perishable like ivory or rhino horn, usually that comes as airline cargo, because one way traffickers use to make the trail go cold is they'll give false addresses for the consignee and the consignor and so on. And then whoever's supposed to pick it up will just not turn up, sometimes for weeks or months. And by then people have kind of lost interest. And then someone will turn up and, maybe even bribe someone to get it out of the back door. And that was their original plan all along. But if it is an animal for the pet trade, like some of these tortoises, some primates, some reptiles, lizards, even insects in some cases, like spiders, then definitely they have to be transported live. So the mortality statistics under those conditions are pretty high, because they're just trying to maximize profits. And in fact, one of the traffickers for the slow lorises told us how they calculate the size of the little boxes they stuff the lorises in. So they stuff the lorises in boxes, put all those boxes inside a suitcase. When it reaches the destination, they see how many of them died and how much of a profit did they make from the living ones. And if too many of them died, they didn't make enough profit, then they'll put the lorises in a slightly bigger box the next time. But even if a bunch of them died, but they made enough of a profit from the living ones, that's okay. They'll just try to cram them in more and more. I mean, we've seen suitcases, huge suitcases, just crammed with hundreds and hundreds of baby turtles and tortoises. Sometimes traffickers get scared and don't pick them up because they're afraid someone's watching them. So, these poor animals are just crammed inside suitcases and dying of suffocation. If it's something that's going to be consumed, then again, there are two ways of transport. It could be dead and then frozen, but that's more expensive because then you've got to pay for refrigeration. It's much cheaper to actually keep the animal alive. So then we'll see a very rapid transport because they want to move it very quickly from source to the market. So it really just depends on what the intended purpose of the animal's use is.
It's kind of really amazing that more doesn't, that more is not being caught just in like the putting your bag through the X-ray machine.
Yeah. So sometimes it's because traffickers are pretty clever. Like With tortoises, they'll actually tape their shells so that you can't see any movement, because tortoises will retract their limbs inside their shell, right? So then there's no movement that shows up in the X-ray. And then if the X-ray technician has not been trained on knowing what wildlife looks like, usually those are declared as toys or something like that. They just look like little toys inside the suitcase. But again, yes, of course, there is corruption, and it's not just official corruption, it's also corruption within airline employees, especially in the cargo handling section. I mean, if something is full of ivory, blood-stained ivory, and it's stinking because the blood and flesh are decomposing, there's no way someone can not be suspicious unless they've been paid not to be.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. This was an incredible event, and I'm sure everybody learned so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Bye.
Bye.